We've been looking at some of the key bikes for 2018. The Juliana Strega and the Santa Cruz Nomad are two of these bikes. Juliana and Santa Cruz launched the bikes together because they are in effect the same bike. They're 170mm high-end enduro bikes. Normally you might think that a 170mm bike needs to be confined to the bike park, you know, where you've got uplifts, you've got big bike park styly tracks, real gnarly stuff. But what they wanted to show is that bikes this big can be pedalled uphill. This is more of a trail bike than it is a gravity bike. There's no denying that having 170mm of travel front and back is going to be great when the trail points down, but these bikes can climb almost with the best of them. That's partly in thanks to an impressive weight for the amount of travel they have, but also the VPP suspension. If you're familiar with the previous generation Nomad, you'll have noticed that the bikes have been re-engineered with a much lower slung suspension system. We already know that having weight low down in the bike improves the feeling of them through corners and through sort of rougher terrain where it boosts the stability. So these bikes really benefit from the weight being lower down. The other difference between the previous generation Nomad and these two is that the VPP linkage has been changed around. So instead of the shock being driven by the upper links, it's now driven by the lower links, which is much more similar to Santa Cruz's V10 downhill bike. This means you get a broadly similar compression ratio on the shock. As you can see from these two bikes here, one has a coil shock and one has an air, and this is a conscious decision from Juliana and Santa Cruz to be able to build a bike that works equally well with both of them. On a more pedal-friendly, almost trail bike, a coil shock a couple of years ago would not have been seen, but coil shocks have developed to the point now where there's threshold damping, there's lockouts, so they are much more friendly when it comes to pedalling up a hill. You then get the benefits of a coil shock, which is a really beautiful, supple feeling through the travel. Or on the air shocks, those bigger volumes now with the bigger negative springs mean that they also are starting to feel almost as smooth and plush as a coil shock.
While Tom's been off riding the Nomad, I've been riding the Juliana Strega. So the Strega is the women-specific equivalent to the Nomad, and essentially it's the same bike, just with different women-specific finishing kit. So Juliana is a sister company to Santa Cruz, and their philosophy is women don't need different geometry, they just need different finishing kit, such as saddles, to suit the riders. There are a few differences between the Strega and the Nomad. For a start, the Strega range isn't quite as extensive as the Nomad, so there aren't any aluminium options for the frame material, and it also doesn't come with a coil shock option. However, as I said, the frame is the same between the two bikes, so if you want the coil shock or an aluminium version, you could just go for the Nomad. The Strega also has a size-specific shock tune, so rather than saying the shock tune is women-specific across the whole range, they've adapted the shock tune for the anticipated rider weight for each size. Colours are obviously a matter of personal opinion, but I have to say that while the Strega colours have gone down well fairly universally, the opinions on the colours chosen for the Nomads have been a little bit split. It's a bit of a Marmite colour. I've ridden this bike for quite a long period of time, including a solid 2 weeks in Whistler, where it handled both the park and the valley trails with no problem at all. It was an absolute pleasure to ride, and those kind of environments are where the Strega and the Nomad are perfectly at home. The bike does climb exceptionally well. In fact, it was a bit of a surprise to me because you anticipate a 170mm travel bike to be a bit sluggish on the climbs. But I took it to the top of the new trail into the Mystic in Whistler, and although I was being overtaken by people on cross-country bikes, it handled that climb with no problem at all, and it was great to have it on technical terrain. Over small hits, the suspension is wonderfully supple. When you get towards the mid-stroke, it's very supportive, which not only eats up those larger hits, but also gives it incredible traction. So this is a bike that you can really rail those corners on. That confidence-inspiring traction is also due in part to some chunky tyres fitted to Santa Cruz's own carbon rims, which are wonderfully wide. The bike carries speed exceptionally well on track, so pumping through terrain allows you to accelerate and make the most of every lump and bump that you encounter on the way. It does get a little bit choked up on square-edged hits, however. You've got to really go for it, but if you do go for it, oh my god, what a ride. While the Strega is based around a unisex frame, the only bike that comes close to it in terms of women-specific geometry is the Liv Hale, which has 160mm of travel. Now personally, I prefer the Strega. It's got a lower bottom bracket, it feels much more confident on rowdy stuff, and it climbs fantastically well as giving you huge amounts of confidence on the descents. That is why the Strega and the Nomad make it into our list of the key bikes for 2018.